"We have more affordable options over there," the manager said. Without hearing what he wanted to buy, the sun hit the glass windows of the Mercedes-Benz dealership in Austin like polished mirrors, reflecting back the kind of day where the air smelled like new leather and expensive ambition. Inside, rows of gleaming vehicles stood like statues in a modern showroom, sleek, sculpted, spotless. Salesmen in tailored suits hovered like hawks, ready to pounce on prospects, their smiles as polished as the cars they sold. No one noticed the old pickup truck pull into the lot. The engine let out a tired sigh as it shut off. The door creaked, then slammed, and from the driver's side stepped out a man who looked like he belonged anywhere but here. Henry Walker adjusted the brim of his faded hat and dusted off his jeans with a slap of his palm. His boots were scuffed, worn in like a second skin, and coated in the kind of dirt you don't find in the city. The calluses on his hands weren't the result of gym workouts. They were from fencing, lifting, repairing, building, real work. He walked through the dealership doors with a purpose as quiet as it was certain. Heads didn't turn. No warm welcome. No salesperson made their approach. Until Brian did. Brian Collins, 32, sharp haircut, Armani watch, and the permanent smirk of someone who believed he could size people up in 3 seconds or less. He spotted Henry from across the floor and didn't like what he saw. An old man with dusty boots, faded denim, and no visible money. "Sir," Brian said, intercepting him smoothly. "Just so you know, our pre-owned section is to the left, out through those doors. They'll be happy to help you there." Henry blinked. "Excuse me?" Brian didn't flinch. "That's where you'll find vehicles in a more practical price range. Let me know if you need help navigating." Henry stared at him for a second, then gave a small nod. "Thank you," he said simply. Then turned and walked in the direction he was pointed to, without a word of protest. He took his time outside. He looked over a few vehicles, opened a door here, leaned into a window there. His movements were slow but intentional. Anyone watching closely might have seen he wasn't confused. He was evaluating. 15 minutes later, he stepped back into the main showroom. Brian saw him coming and sighed audibly. He was talking to a younger couple about leasing options, but excused himself with a practiced grin. He met Henry near the G-Wagon display, standing directly under a large poster showcasing the AMG G63, an off-road luxury beast dressed in black and chrome. Henry looked at it, then at Brian. "I'll take 8 of these," he said. Brian blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "These." Henry pointed at the SUV behind him. "Mercedes AMG G63s. I need 8. Paid in full." Brian stared, expecting a punchline. When it didn't come, he let out a chuckle, half polite, half patronizing. "8? You mean 8 like 1 for each day of the week plus a spare?" he joked. Henry didn't laugh. "I need 1 for each of my ranch managers," he said evenly. "We've had a good year. I'd like to reward them." Brian's smile froze. His eyes flicked to Henry's clothes again. Still the same dusty boots, the same sun-beaten shirt. This had to be a prank. "Well, listen, these aren't vehicles we just move in bulk. It's not Costco. We'd need to start a credit application, financial checks, proof of income, some guarantees." "I'll be paying in cash," Henry replied calmly. Brian's eyes narrowed. "Sure. And I'm the president of Mercedes-Benz USA." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Is that right?" "Look, I don't want to waste your time," Brian said, shifting into his firm but fair tone. "Even if you were serious, and I'm not saying you are, we have a process. We don't just sell $200,000 vehicles to walk-ins with no background checks." Henry glanced around the showroom. His face was unreadable. Then he looked back at Brian. "Appreciate your help," he said. Brian nodded, already turning away. "No problem. Have a good day." But Henry didn't leave. Instead, he walked toward the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman with nervous eyes and a headset looped around her ear, looked up as he approached. "Hi," Henry said kindly. "Would you mind letting the general manager know I'd like to speak with him?" She hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, ma'am," he said with a smile. "But I figure he might want to hear something that's worth about $1.5 million. Her eyes widened. She glanced down at her tablet, then picked up the phone. Henry took off his hat, brushing the brim with his sleeve. Behind him, the sun cut through the glass just enough to make the silver Mercedes logos gleam like stars. He stood there calmly, waiting for someone who might finally take the time to listen. The receptionist put down the phone, her voice lower now, more respectful. "Mr. Robert will see you in his office, sir," she said, rising slightly from her chair. "He'll be right out." Henry tipped his head politely. "Thank you, ma'am." Moments later, from the hallway behind the glass offices, a man emerged. Early 60s, grey suit, neat glasses, calm eyes. He walked with confidence, but not arrogance, like someone who'd spent decades learning to read people beyond what met the eye. "Mr. Walker?" the man asked, offering his hand. "Yes, sir." "I'm Robert Carter, general manager here. Please, come with me." As they walked through the showroom, Henry noticed Brian at a distance, watching with furrowed brows and arms crossed. Their eyes met briefly, just enough for Henry to register the flicker of confusion on the younger man's face. Inside Robert's office, the mood changed. It was quieter, warmer. Framed photographs of family and classic cars lined the wall. The smell of roasted coffee hung in the air. "Can I get you something to drink?" Robert asked. "A coffee, water?" "Coffee would be fine, thank you," Henry replied. Robert poured 2 cups and handed one over. "So," he said, settling into the chair across from his guest, "how can I help you today?" Henry took a sip, then placed the mug gently on a coaster. "I came here to buy 8 new Mercedes-AMG G63s, he said. "Full payment, no trade-ins, no financing." Robert didn't blink. He didn't smile skeptically. He just nodded slowly, as if someone had told him the sky was blue. "I see," he said. "That's quite an order. I've got 8 ranch managers who've worked hard their whole lives. This year was especially good for us. Weather, production, market prices. I want to reward them." Robert leaned forward slightly. "Well, first of all, let me say, that's an incredible gesture." He tapped a few keys on his keyboard, bringing up the internal inventory. "We have 7 in stock at this location. I can secure the 8th from our San Antonio partner." "That'll work," Henry said. "I'd like them black, same spec if possible. No flashy trims." Robert nodded. "Understood. Before we get into the paperwork, do you mind if I verify some basic info? Standard protocol. We don't get many 8-car purchases." "Go ahead." Robert asked for Henry's ID and company name. Henry handed over his wallet and a worn but clean business card. Walker & Sons Livestock, Estemta 1974, Bastrop County, TX. While Robert typed, Henry sipped his coffee, watching the sunlight crawl across the blinds. Within seconds, the results began populating Robert's screen. Land holdings, company valuation, registered vehicles, tax status. Henry Walker wasn't just well off. He was wealthy, rooted, and respected in his industry. Robert paused, his brow rising as he read. "You own over 2,000 acres of productive land," he said slowly. "No debt. Your business has been operating for nearly 50 years. Mr. Walker, this is more than sufficient." "I figured it would be," Henry said, not boastful, just honest. Robert looked up and smiled. "Let me be the first to say, I'm sorry for the way you were received today." Henry shook his head. "Not your fault, but I do appreciate that you listened." Robert stood. "Let me personally walk you through the AMG options. You'll want to see the actual interiors, customizations, comfort packages. We can lock in your specs today." As they walked back toward the G-Class section of the showroom, Brian watched from behind a column of sales desks. His face was tight, unreadable. He glanced at the other staff as if trying to confirm that what he was seeing wasn't a prank. Robert gestured toward one of the AMG G63s. "Now this one here, premium Napa leather, 22-inch wheels, twin-turbo V8, full digital cockpit. She's a beast on road and off." Henry opened the door, climbed in, and ran his hand across the steering wheel. "Feels right," he said. They reviewed specs, colors, delivery logistics. Henry preferred all 8 to be nearly identical, subtle, understated, built to last. Back in Robert's office, the contract was drafted. The total came in just under $1.6 million before tax. Before Henry could reach for his checkbook, Robert stopped him. "I'd like to offer you something," Robert said, "as a thank you for your patience, your business, and the respect you showed this dealership even when it wasn't returned." He slid over a paper with the revised total, a $45,000 discount. Henry raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to do that." "I know, but I want to. It's good for business and better for principal." Henry nodded, pulled out a check from a small leather folio, and signed without hesitation. Once everything was complete, Robert leaned back, visibly pleased. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. You've made my entire week." Henry smiled. "Likewise." He stood, collected his hat, then paused before heading to the door. "There's just one thing I'd like to ask you," he said quietly. "It's about that young man at the front." Robert's smile faded slightly, shifting into something more serious. "I figured you might mention him." Henry looked out toward the showroom through the glass. Brian was now talking to a colleague, stealing glances back at the office. "I don't want him fired," Henry said. "That's not what I came here for." "I understand. But I do think he's got something to learn, something they don't teach in sales training." Robert folded his hands. "What would you suggest?" Henry turned back toward him, his expression calm but firm. "I'd like him transferred to the pre-owned section. Let him spend some time where people don't walk in wearing Rolexes and designer shoes. Maybe then he'll start seeing people before he judges them." Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I can make that happen." 6 months, Henry added. "That's all I ask." Robert extended his hand again. "It's done." Henry shook it. "Much obliged." And with that, the man in dusty boots and a denim shirt walked out of the glass office with the quiet dignity of someone who knew exactly who he was. He didn't look back, but the people behind him were already seeing him differently. Brian Collins had been called into the general manager's office once before. That time it was to accept a bonus check for hitting quarterly numbers 3 months early. That time he walked in with swagger and walked out with a smirk. This time was different. He adjusted his tie twice in the reflection of the glass office wall. His walk was slower, his pulse a little too fast. He wasn't sure what Henry Walker had said, but he had a sinking feeling it wasn't, "Give that young man a raise." Robert was standing when Brian entered. That alone was enough to raise alarms. "Have a seat, Brian." He did. Robert sat across from him, hands folded, eyes calm, but serious. "You remember the gentleman you redirected to pre-owned earlier today?" Brian gave a nervous smile. "Yeah, the older guy in boots? I didn't mean anything by it. I just figured—" Robert raised a hand. "You figured wrong." Brian shut his mouth. "His name is Henry Walker," Robert continued. "He came here today to purchase 8 brand new AMG G63s in cash for his farm managers." Brian blinked, frozen. He's a well-known rancher in Bastrop County, owns over 2,000 acres. His business has outlived most of the startups in this city by decades. Brian sat back, stunned. "I had no idea." "You didn't ask," Robert said simply. Brian looked away. Robert leaned forward. "Now, Mr. Walker made a request, one I fully support." Brian looked up, bracing himself. "You're not being fired," Robert said, "but you are being moved. Effective tomorrow, you'll be working in our pre-owned division." Brian stared. "Wait, what? You're demoting me?" Robert shook his head. "Not a demotion, a reassignment. Mr. Walker asked that you spend some time in a section where appearances don't sell cars, where you'll be forced to listen first, judge never, and recognize value when it doesn't wear a watch worth more than a down payment." "For how long?" 6 months. Brian stood. "This is insane. I've closed more high-end sales in the last year than anyone here." "And yet you lost the biggest one this dealership has seen in a decade because you made a snap judgment." Brian ran a hand through his hair. He looked frustrated. But underneath something was cracking, a realization he couldn't quite deny. "You can take the rest of the day," Robert said. "Tomorrow, report to James in pre-owned. He's expecting you." Brian walked out without a word. The pre-owned section felt like a different world. Gone were the polished floors, showroom lighting, and endless espresso refills. Instead, there were modest sedans, trade-ins with stories etched into their mileage, and buyers who read fine print like it was survival. Brian hated it. At first, he treated it like exile. He kept to himself, checked his watch often, counted days like prison bars. But then slowly things started to change. It began with a woman named Cynthia. She came in holding her toddler, looking exhausted but hopeful. She'd saved for months to afford a reliable car for daycare drop-offs and job interviews. She had a printout of the vehicle she wanted, an 8-year-old Honda Civic, and a folder full of bank statements and handwritten budgets. Brian was halfway through his default pitch when she cut in. "I know it's not much," she said, "but I need something that won't leave me stranded on the freeway again." Brian paused. For once, he didn't talk. He listened, and he realized this wasn't about closing a sale. This was about changing someone's life. They spent an hour together. He helped her run the numbers, suggested a different model with better safety ratings, found a way to cut the interest rate by a full point. She cried when she signed the papers, thanked him twice. The next day, a man named Carlos came in, Vietnam vet, quiet, wanted to trade in his old truck, said he was finally ready to let go of the vehicle he used to teach his grandson how to drive. Brian noticed the trembling in his hands when he handed over the keys. They talked for a while, about the war, about loss, about starting over at 70. Brian didn't make a big sale that day, but he shook Carlos's hand like he meant it. Then there was the older couple, Walter and June, married 52 years, dressed modestly, polite to the point of shy. Brian assumed they were browsing. They weren't. They paid for a Mercedes C-Class in full, cash from a small leather envelope they pulled from a battered handbag. "We saved for a long time," Walter said, smiling. "We figured we'd go with something nice for our last car." Brian's voice caught in his throat when he thanked them. That night he stayed late, not to catch up on work, but to think. He remembered Henry Walker's face, calm, kind, not angry, not offended, just disappointed. A man who knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove it. And Brian, for the first time, realized how much he had to learn. Weeks turned to months. He no longer looked at shoes before offering a greeting. He stopped assuming. He started listening. And somewhere between the trade-ins and the test drives, Brian Collins became a better salesman. No, he became a better man. Still, something weighed on him. There was one thing he hadn't done. One thing he needed to do. He had started writing the letter 3 times, scrapped them all. The words never felt quite right. But tonight he sat at his desk after hours, the showroom silent around him, and finally put pen to paper. He wrote slowly. From the heart. No sales pitch, no excuses, just honesty. When he finished, he folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote a name across the front in firm, clear print. Mr. Henry Walker, Bastrop County, TX. He took a deep breath, walked over to the outgoing mail bin near the front desk, and dropped it in. It landed with a soft thunk, and with it, something heavy lifted off his chest. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in plain white, addressed in simple block letters. It was buried between utility bills and an equipment invoice from a feed supplier. No company logo, no return address, just Mr. Henry Walker, Bastrop County, TX. Henry stood at the edge of his porch, a mug of coffee in one hand, the mail in the other. The air was cool, still waking up. A light breeze tugged at the trees out past the cattle fences. He studied the envelope for a moment. Something about the handwriting was familiar, cautious, careful. He opened it with a knife worn smooth from decades of use and unfolded the paper inside. The writing was neat, steady, and personal. Dear Mr. Walker, I've started and stopped this letter more times than I care to admit. No email, no phone call seemed right for what I needed to say. The day you walked into our dealership, I made a mistake. I judged you before I heard you, assumed your worth before I knew your name. I treated you like a problem to redirect, not a person to understand. You had every right to get angry, to demand my job, to make a scene. But you didn't. Instead, you taught me something. You didn't come at me with ego or revenge. You came with grace. and somehow you still believed I could learn from the mess I'd made. 6 months in pre-owned felt like a punishment at first. It wasn't. It was a classroom. Every day I met someone who reminded me of you, not because they were dressed the same or talked the same, but because they carried stories I didn't bother to see before. There was a young mum with $1,000 budget and £1,000 heart, a veteran who traded his pride in for peace, an elderly couple who saved cash for 10 years to buy the car they'd end their lives with. I used to think selling luxury cars made me important. Now I know people make the moment meaningful, not price tags. So thank you for not ending my career but reshaping it, and thank you for the lesson. I learned more from you in one day than I had in 10 years on the job. If you ever find yourself near the city, I'd be honored to shake your hand again. With respect, Brian Collins. Henry sat back in his rocking chair, eyes soft as he read the letter again, slower the second time. He let the silence hang for a few moments after finishing. Then he folded the paper with care, smoothing the crease, and stood up. Inside the house, he walked to a worn oak dresser in the corner of his study. The top drawer opened with a quiet groan, revealing a small box filled with personal things, an old silver pocket knife, his father's wristwatch, photos from early ranch days, memories that mattered. He placed the letter inside, not as a trophy, as a reminder. Later that afternoon, Henry stepped into the long open garage just beyond the barn. The smell of oil and leather filled the air. 8 black Mercedes-AMG G63s sat in a line, polished to perfection, each one identical but unique in a way that mattered. On each vehicle's dash was a small engraved nameplate. For Jake, loyalty. For Maria, grit. For Ellis, stewardship. For Ramon, integrity. For Chloe, resilience. For Leo, heart. For Devon, craft. For Nate, brotherhood. These weren't just trucks. They were rewards for years of sweat, sunburn, frostbite, early mornings and late nights. These were acknowledgments of people who, like Henry, didn't measure success by what they wore, but by what they built. He walked past each one, running a hand along the side of the last vehicle. It didn't need to be flashy. It needed to be real, just like the people who earned them. As he reached the end of the row, Henry paused, looked out at the ranch behind him, the land he loved, the people he trusted, the life he built without fanfare. He took a breath, the kind that comes when a season turns, not just outside but inside. Then he spoke, not to anyone in particular, just the truth aloud. "Dignity isn't something you wear," he said quietly. "It's something you live."